This is our substitute for Wednesday's class on the muscular system. You'll find this PowerPoint posted on Blackboard, and then make sure after you've watched it and taken some thorough notes that you go into week 10 and complete the skeletal and muscular system quiz. So some of it will be from our previous lecture and then some from today's lecture. So there are 3 types of muscle tissue, as you can see right here. 2 of these muscle tissues do have striations on them. So basically stripes that you can see underneath the microscope. The one that has the most visible striations is this one here, and that is skeletal muscle. And skeletal muscle is the only voluntary muscle. This is the skeletal muscle that you work out when you go to the gym. You'll notice if you look at each skeletal muscle fiber, so here is one fiber or one muscle cell, not only does it have those very visible striations, but it also has multiple nuclei. So that's what those purple organelles are there. It has not just one nucleus per cell, but several. The other striated muscle is here, and this is cardiac. Remember, that's the one found in your heart. The only place cardiac muscle is found. Cardiac muscle is very branched. As you can see here, we have some kind of branches on there. And then there's usually 1 or 2 nuclei per cell. Again, this is per cell. Okay. And then it also has these gap junctions that you can kind of see, these little jagged lines on here, and these are called intercalated discs. And it makes it so one muscle cell can communicate very easily with the next muscle cell in order to coordinate contraction of the heart muscle. The similarity between these 2 over here on the left side of the screen, okay, is that they are the 2 involuntary muscles. So signals come from the brain and control smooth and cardiac muscles. Smooth is the oddball here. It is not striated. It has 1 nuclei per cell. And you'll notice the cells are kind of tapered here on the ends. They have kind of a real fat belly kind of in the middle, and then they kind of taper off on the end. And so that gives away smooth muscle. So location for smooth, we just talked about peristalsis, which are those smooth muscle contractions in the digestive tract. We also have smooth muscle lining that tunica media of veins and arteries. Basically, any place in the body where involuntary movement is happening other than the heart muscle is going to be smooth muscle. Here are the functions of skeletal muscles. Probably not anything too surprising, but we do have the skeletal muscles that play a role in negative feedback. So as these months get colder and colder, and as your body temperature starts to decrease, skeletal muscles can actually become involuntary, and that's when you start shivering. And shivering serves the purpose of increasing your body temp. So it actually generates some heat to warm you up. So if we strip off the skin and the tissues underneath the skin and start looking at how the muscles are attached to the bone, we have some dense regular connective tissue. That makes up the tendon, and that's what connects muscle to bone. So remember that dense regular connective tissue is lots of those thick collagen fibers laid down in parallel. And if we trace, for example, this biceps brachii, if you just sit there and do a little biceps curl while you're watching this lecture, you'll notice on one end that tendon attaches here to your scapula. Okay, we call that the origin of the biceps brachii because this is the stationary bone that the muscle attaches to. And then the insertion on the other end, you'll notice we've got a tendon down here, okay, attaching into the radius, and the radius is called the insertion of the biceps brachii because this is the moving bone that muscle is attached to. So to get a good biceps curl, of course, you want to keep that origin stationary. You don't want to be swinging your arm away from your body. Skeletal muscles can be a bit overwhelming, especially for students studying anatomy, but there's a lot of hints in the naming that are there. So for example, if you see maximus or vastus in a name, that tells you the size. It must be a big muscle. Okay. So for example, you also have a gluteus minimus, and that in humans is a smaller muscle. Okay. Or if you think back to high school geometry, sometimes the muscles are named by a shape. So a deltoid is a triangle. Okay, so that's your shoulder muscle. Your trapezius goes down your back, kind of looks like a kite, and that's a trapezium or trapezoid shape. Sometimes the name tells you location. So if you put your hand on your frontal bone, okay, which is basically your forehead, that muscle right there is just called the frontalis. Find your tibia, that's the larger bone in your lower leg, and the tibialis anterior is basically the front of that bone. And so that would be like if someone came up and kicked you in the shin, or you put a shin guard on, it covers up that tibialis anterior. So those are kind of nice because they tell you where they're located in the body. If we look at, for example, the abdomen, we have kind of this large group of muscles. It's not just one muscle. It's called the rectus abdominis that just kind of runs straight. So rectus means straight. Oops. And then to the sides of your waist, so you're working the rectus abdominis when you're doing some abdominal crunches. But then if you do some kind of twisting, okay, on the sides of your waist, you actually have some external obliques. Okay, so when you see oblique, it's basically running at a diagonal. Okay. And there is an internal oblique either that's a little deeper to those external obliques. Sometimes the name is named by parts of the bone that they're attached to. So you already know where the sternum is. Okay. The mastoid process is actually part of your temporal bone in your cranium. So if you put your hand right behind your ear, you'll feel kind of a hard, bony process. That's called your mastoid process. And so actually, if this is your, bear with me here. So here's your face. Here's kind of your neck and your chest. And so this sternocleidomastoid basically runs in your neck. If I could draw it, kind of where he's got his head up, almost looks like he's got a beard on. Sternocleidomastoid kind of runs at a V from the mastoid process, which is up here behind your ear, down to your sternum. Okay, that's the sternocleidomastoid. So it tells you the bones are attached to. Sometimes they tell you number of attachments. So the biceps brachii has 2 attachments, okay, versus the triceps brachii has 3. Or sometimes the muscle is named by the action that it does. So for example, some of the muscles that control the digits in your hand, they're responsible for extending your fingers. So those are called the extensor digitorum. Or for example, we have some adductors in your leg. We have adductor femoris and adductor longus. And adductor means that you're going to be moving that body part towards the midline of your body. So sometimes even some of the equipment at the gym is actually named after maybe some of these muscles. When we get to the cellular level, we have a whole new set of vocabulary that you need to know. So instead of just using the generic term plasma membrane or cell membrane, since we're talking about a muscle and muscle is flesh, okay, the term that means flesh is called sarco. And so the plasma membrane of a muscle cell is called the sarcolemma. Okay. Instead of just generic cytoplasm, again, we throw that sarco on there, that's the sarcoplasm. And instead of the endoplasmic reticulum, we throw that sarco on there, and so we have the sarcoplasmic reticulum, or we can call it the SR. Okay, and specifically that sarcoplasmic reticulum is important for muscle contraction because its function is to store calcium. And you're going to see from the steps of muscle contraction the important role that calcium plays. Here we're kind of listing, going from a big bunch of fibers. This is the largest thing on this list. Okay, so we call the bundle of fibers, we call it a fascicle. If we pluck out one of those muscle fibers or muscle cells, we're getting smaller yet. Each muscle cell is made up of something called myofibrils. And then lastly, on the myofibril, we'll see some little striations, and that's because it's made of something called myofilaments. Okay, and there are thin and thick myofilaments that make up these myofibrils. So know this order. Practice it from either smallest to largest or largest to smallest. There's kind of a picture showing, again, how you get from this big muscle here and work all the way down to the sarcomere level, which is made up of those thin and thick myofilaments. So even here, there's kind of some thin ones along here. There's some thin over here as well. Okay, the thick is kind of this darker pink that's in the center.